This is the Brilliantly Branded podcast, a safe place to have a voice and talk about branding and all the reasons that bring a brand to be brilliantly branded. I am your host, Maria Lucia Romero, a woman empowering other women, and I am welcoming you to this journey of learning and inspiration to build awareness around the world of business and the world of brands. This is the Brilliantly Branded podcast. You don't want to miss this episode. Our guest today is showing us more reasons to realize that it is not about men versus women. It is about going deep within ourselves. She is Peta Milan, a woman, a creator behind the two impactful concepts, Rewilding the Masculine and Regenerative Leadership Investing. As well, she is the founder of a family office in Dubai, and she has been around living in different countries and always making her voice heard. Yes, you heard well. Regenerative investment. She really broke it down, explaining how this is more than just sustainability, green, circular economies, and this is a whole different ball game. So Peta got some impact explanations about the ups and downs we all face and how we can make it better together. She also dived into the outcomes of applying generative approaches to business, investing, and governance. It is pretty mind-blowing stuff, trust me. She also created this incredible program called Rewilding the Masculine. She gave us a lot of details about how men are feeling during the business journey, but even better, how they are living loneliness without the option to express how these are affecting them. So don't forget that our podcast is all about bringing together diverse voices to lift each other up. Peta Chats with us is truly an eye-opener. We are digging into the real stuff here, understanding where we are coming from, what shapes us, and especially in the wild world of business. So please grab a cup of coffee or tea or your favorite drink and join us in this amazing episode of the Brilliantly Branded podcast. Well, hello again, back to the Brilliantly Branded podcast. Again, I have to say sorry for my voice. I have this voice because I have been speaking a lot during the last days, talking about this new project, this new community around the Brilliantly Branded. And with the main purpose, of course, is women empowerment through the lens of branding. So as I have been explaining, things have been evolved, and part of my why have become to bring together all those tools that we need to empower ourselves and succeed. So this community will have all these tools, and this is an ambition and a visionary platform that will get access to all those tools together in only one place. So I will need your help to make that come into the reality, and you will have more information about this in the platform that I will start building right now. But for the moment, you can join us on the LinkedIn group and be part of this community. Today, we invite a very interesting woman, and she has two important topics to talk about. One is the regenerative investing, and the other one is the rewild the masculine. In the Brilliantly Branded podcast, we talk about everything and all these tools that will make you feel inspired and feel you that you are in the right place to learn, to evolve, and to grow. So now I have to say welcome to Peta. Peta Milan is my guest today. So Peta, welcome to the Brilliantly Branded podcast.
Thank you, Maria. It's lovely to be here.
So I invite her to share with us her approach on all the challenges about these conventional norms that we already have, and related with the masculine in this complex, interconnected world. I will have to please asking you if you can introduce yourself and share a bit what led you to do what you did in the past and what led you to do what you are doing right now. So please.
Sure. Thank you. So I'm a principal of a Handmill Group family office based out of Dubai. We're a first generation single family office. And we have a range of different investments where we focus primarily on early stage or seed ventures, but we have quite a strict regenerative investment thesis. So prior to doing this work, I was working in venture, in startup. I've been building ventures since I was 24, which was quite a long time ago now. And I have worked across many different sectors. I've worked across tourism and hospitality. I've worked across supply chain and fleet management. I've worked in consulting. I've done projects in natural resource mining, financial services, all different kinds of things. And when in Australia, which is where I'm originally from, when I was working in consulting, particularly, we were doing some projects where we were collaborating with some of the big four consulting firms. And being in Australia, natural resource mining is quite a prominent industry. And I was just seeing a lot of waste and a lot of social ecological impact that made me really uncomfortable. And by waste, I also mean like a lot of wasted money where people, companies would pay these organizations and people thousands upon thousands, if not millions of dollars to, do change projects or do these types of things, and they wouldn't work. So after many years as a single mum doing that kind of work, I decided enough was enough. And I got offered quite a big CEO role for a McKinsey's competitor, which I turned down. And I sold everything in Australia and I moved with my kids to Southeast Asia. And we just chilled out there for a little while. I had a bit of a sabbatical, did some great healing work for myself because I was quite burnt out, to really reflect on what is it that I wanted to do. And so that's where I got involved in wanting to tell stories. So I had originally an arts background with a bachelor's in philosophy and literature. So I wanted to create movies because
Wow.
I didn't see myself as someone who just disappeared into a beach shack for a year to bash out a novel. I was very collaborative. I wanted to be around people and I loved the creative process. So I had a friend who was very kind and introduced me and brought me onto a couple of Hollywood productions that were being filmed in Thailand. He had a production services company. And so that's kind of where I got my break and I learned a lot. I applied the way of learning that you have to apply when you're in consulting, where you're going into a new industry and you really have to learn very fast and you have to look at the risks and the opportunities. And I brought all of those skills from business into understanding the industry of filmmaking and realized it was at the time when Netflix was just coming into being and there was a streaming on demand. And lots of seasoned Hollywood producers didn't really understand it. They didn't understand how the financing was going to work. They didn't understand how the returns were going to work. SVOD was brand new. And so I realized that if I was going to tell stories, it had to be a broader media concept, not just filmmaking. So a very seasoned Hollywood producer and I, we created a company together, Transcendent Media Capital out of Hong Kong, to do this type of work. And he gradually took a bit more of a backseat because he realized with respect to the emerging technology around media and different things like that, it was a bit outside of his sphere of knowledge because he was a more seasoned Hollywood guy who did a lot of the old Chuck Norris films in the 70s and things like this. So, but he was happy for me to go and spread my wings and really explore that. But I did realize at some point that in order to have the impact that moved me, that gave me a sense of purpose, we needed more than storytelling. Storytelling is an important tool and has been the way in which we've passed knowledge on through our ancestors and through generations over time. But in order to really shift how people function and behave, it needs to be more than an inspiring story because people will feel inspired for a few minutes, maybe even a few days, but then they just get back to life as normal. So that's when I really branched out into tech in a big way. And we invested in a tech company. But when I was doing that work, I saw the kind of same broken, fractured, siloed thinking in corporations in Europe as what I had been experiencing working in the APAC region. And so I knew that this was not just an Australian or APAC cultural thing, but it was more of a global phenomenon in terms of how we understood things in the world. And during this time, I'd been asked by the former chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He was an amazing man. Under his stewardship, the IPCC won the Nobel Peace Prize alongside Al Gore for their 1.5-degree special report. He had asked me to join his international advisory board for his World Sustainable Development Forum, which he put together. And around a similar time, I don't know, this all kind of coalesced at the same time, I was asked to join All Hands, which was a multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder group that worked to counter radicalization and violence in the world. So I was working with or around a lot of security forces, former chiefs of police, things like this. And as I was starting to
Wow.
work in these spaces, I really saw that there was a deep connection between different kinds of displacements of people. And when we think about displacement, we often think about physical displacement, like refugees from the Ukraine fleeing or refugees from Syria fleeing. But there's more than that. So there's economic displacement. If we look at the growing epidemic of homelessness or houselessness in the US, there's over 600,000 people unhoused in the US at the moment, and it's continuing to get worse. That's an economic displacement and
Wow.
also a physical displacement, right? Then there's an ecological displacement where we've seen farmers in Bangladesh having to move into the cities because their farms became salinated. They could no longer farm on their homelands anymore. So they became ecologically displaced. We also see that a lot in Latin America. You would know, being Colombian, Maria, how many displaced people there are through the logging industry
Yes.
and so on.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, but there's also a different kind of displacement that I was witnessing through All Hands, which was an identity displacement. So in Minnesota, for example, you have the largest Somalian population outside of Somalia. And these kids are stuck between being Somalian, which is the rich Somali culture of their families, and being American and being in American schools with that set of expectations of what it means to be American in the school system. And they're stuck in this identity conflict. And that was actually leading quite a
Wow.
lot to those kids becoming flight risks and going to Syria and becoming radicalized. So amazing policing system there with Rich Stanek, who was working with the Somali mums to prevent the kids becoming a flight risk. So they were working together with the Somali community. So there were all these different types of displacements, but what I saw is that with those displacements came a significant reduction in quality of life. And in the reduction of quality of life, it created those conditions that gave rise to radicalization. And we've seen huge amounts of increase in far right wing radicalization. If we go back 10 years ago, it was only, we were talking about ISIS and Al Qaeda and things like this. And now we're seeing a lot of far right wing. We're seeing incel. We're seeing lots of different lone radicalized folks, like just a lone guy going into, when I was at the World Economic Forum last year, I just left the all hands meeting in London. I was in Davos, and we'd literally just been looking at the Texas attack on the primary school that had just recently happened from a lone shooter. And when I was in Davos, it was only just a couple of weeks after we'd studied that one. Then there was the Buffalo attack where the young kid went in and killed a bunch of folks in the supermarket in Buffalo. And so these were lone
Wow.
self-radicalized folks, right? And they're buying into a powerful narrative of injustice. So in their minds, they're trying to right an injustice. And we're seeing this type of polarization increasing around the world. Having spent a lot of time working with impact investors and getting to understand that model, I was seeing that the way in which we're doing investment, whether it be venture capital or impact investing, it's just not having the type of felt sense impact that we need in the world, the type of impact that's actually going to mitigate some of these challenges that are brought about socially, ecologically, climate change. I mean, I just spoke at the Commodities Investment Summit in London earlier this year, and I was really surprised to see leading economists still thinking that interest rates and inflation are the biggest risks to investment, but they don't understand the difference between weather and climate. You know,
Wow.
and over the
That is
past and over the past 20 years, we've experienced, just for some statistics, over 8,000 catastrophic climate events affecting over 4
Yeah.
billion people and 2.97 trillion in economic losses between the years of 2000 and 2020. And it's getting worse. In 2021, we saw over 3,000 climate events in Indonesia alone.
Hmm.
So, so I was like, well, what is there? Like, what's this thing that's missing? And that was when I really came upon this concept of regeneration. And regeneration was a complete paradigm shift away from traditional models of investing. And what it is it's a shift towards an understanding of the self and the world as a complex living system and creating from that understanding. Now, I just finished an international study, in fact, of people around the world saying that they're working in regeneration. And when we dug into the work that they were doing, very, very few were actually doing regenerative work. Most people were using the word interchangeably to mean sustainability or circular or a donut economy, but very few were actually working from a living systems paradigm. So I got very kind of strong in my sense of, well, I don't want regeneration to just become another word that we bandy about and we say we're doing, and then it continues to not deliver the outcomes, just like we've seen with impact investing. I want to provide a space where people can have an experience of regeneration and actually do the work and deliver the outcomes that are possible that we've seen over 25 years of regenerative work. So that's where I designed a very, very clear model for regeneration and brought that thesis to our family office. And I've now designed a 18-month program specifically for men in leadership roles across business, investment, and public office. That is a deep experiential program around regenerative leadership and how to bring regenerative work into those really critical spaces of business leadership, investing, and also governance in public office.
I have a question there because here is two things that coming together, and is the concept of regenerative investment and the concept of rewild the masculinity. I don't know if those things are the same. I mean, this you are explaining all the things, but are connected. Why just this program is just for men, or that is include women as well? Can you elaborate a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah. So the reason I'm starting with men is because the truth is that the majority of people who hold leadership roles in business, boards, investment circles, and government are men. And I've been part of many, many women's circles and women's leadership groups and women's empowerment groups, similar to what you're doing with Brilliantly Branded, Maria, for the past 6 years. But there is very, very little that's available for men. That's around healing, that's around shifting the paradigm of thinking, which is around challenging traditional patriarchal archetypes. So when I talk about patriarchy, I'm talking about the paradigm of thinking that is not to do with men, but it's to do with the idea that we have to command and control our environment. And from that, we're continually extractive. That's the thing around patriarchy. And women have been terribly abused and lost their ability to have a voice and to have leadership roles under patriarchy. But men have also been terribly harmed by patriarchy, where they're forced into this singular archetype of the hero. You know, if we look at all of our stories from ancient Greece and before, we have these stories of Hercules, you know, the man that has to like fight the demons and fight the dragons and fight the bad guys. And that's really removing men away from the divine masculine, which is kind of like the essence. When we're working with regeneration, we're working with essence patterns. We're not working with problems and solutions. And in that, then we're working with potential, because nature doesn't have problems. Nature is just in a constant state of becoming into its potential. Like the idea of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly, or the idea of, how all the different participants in the living system work together to keep growing and thriving. We've disconnected from that as humans. We've gone predominantly into a fight or flight response where there's a scarcity of resources, there's competition for wealth, and it's all extractive. It's all me, me, me. It's anthropocentric. And so I see a lot
Yeah.
of things that are designed like human-centered economics, human-centered thinking, human-centered design. Well, I think we've got enough that's human-centered. We actually need to shift towards actually understanding that I am a complex living system and I exist and am interdependent with other complex living systems. So how do I
Yeah.
understand that complexity in a way that's safe? And most of us don't feel safe around complexity. It feels too overwhelming, too big, too much, too hard to handle. So we've developed this scientific method which enables us to extract parts and pieces and study the little piece and say, okay, if there's enough of us studying the different pieces, then we can understand the whole. But that's not the truth. If you take an elephant and someone's studying the trunk and the other person's studying the tail and the other person's studying the ear and the other person's studying the foot, you bring them together, you don't get a clear sense of what does it mean to actually be an elephant? What's the essence of an elephant? And we've seen that in our
Yeah.
medical profession where there's very few ways to actually look at the whole system of being human. It's only just
Yeah.
now that in our understanding of the gut, we're realizing that we have similar neural processes in our gut as what we have in our brain. And if we look at the
Yeah.
impact of our diets and our highly processed, highly sugared diets on the gut, and how destructive that is for our bodies, and we're actually damaging
Yeah.
a part of our body that is as essential for intelligence and intuition and connection as the brain is. So we're not
Yeah.
good at understanding things as wholes, as whole systems, and that's really where regeneration takes us.
Yeah. And I have then another question, and is basically what is you started to talk about this patriarchy and the masculinity, and then the position of women on this part, and how what is this difference between this patriarchy and the masculinity? I think I would love to know more about that.
Yeah. So in my program, I'm bringing a mixed modality approach, which is bringing in the regenerative practice because I'm an accredited regenerative practitioner, but I'm also an accredited tantra facilitator. Tantra's got a bit of a bad rap since Osho in the 60s, where everyone thinks it's about sex, but it's not just about sex. It's actually a very deep tradition from the ancient Vedas in India. And I also work with a lot of somatic work, like body work, because as I've realized that if we want change, change does not come about, like deep change doesn't come about through a purely cognitive process. It requires an embodied experience of something different, a different way of being. And so we're also including in that plant medicines, including cacao, psilocybin, and ayahuasca in the process. So it's really looking at a really deep mixed modality approach and a whole systems change within the self for the first 12 months. And then the last 6 months, we go into how do you bring that shift in the self to creating in ways that are entirely innovative and new in practice along business strategy
Mhm.
and investment strategy and implementation. So when we're looking at the masculine and feminine from the perspective of the Vedas, of the ancient Vedas, there's this idea of Shakti and Shiva. And some of you might know a dear friend of mine, Nalima Bhatt, who wrote an amazing book with Raj Sisodia, who was the founder of Conscious Capitalism. They wrote a book called Shakti Leadership, which is about bringing feminine and masculine energy balance back into leadership. And Nalima is amazing.
Yeah.
Um, so in the ancient Vedas, there was a kind of god named Shiva and the goddess Shakti. But I'm kind of ruining it a bit because in ancient Sanskrit, there's not a relation to masculine and feminine that's gendered in the way that we use it, right? So it's just two polarities of energy. And so in English, we call it masculine and feminine. So the masculine
Yes.
in its wholeness is about presence. It's about doing over being. It's actually a grounded container from which the feminine can arise. And the feminine is about movement and creativity and connection to wisdom and the cosmos. And so if we look at ancient traditions, there were clear roles in those societies where the women were the oracles and the seers, and the medicine, the the medicine ladies, and the men would look to their women to get the guidance, and then the men would take the guidance and they would turn those things into action. But according to the Vedas, the masculine and the feminine exists within each of us. And through patriarchy and a range of other environmental things, that masculine and the feminine have both become distorted. And in that distortion, there are kind of a lot of wounds that drive the show, a lot of cravings, a lot of, seeking for external validation, and the way in which the masculine component gets wounded is quite different to the way in which the feminine gets wounded. The masculine tends to get wounded more from external factors like societal expectations, lack of intimacy and care in young age, due to boys don't cry, boys don't hug, all this type of stuff that we've been taught. I even learnt about in the 70s and 80s, there was this thing that doctors were actually encouraging parents to do, which was called controlled crying. So if your baby wouldn't stop crying for some reason, you
Oh,
were supposed to
just
put the baby down and then walk away and leave your baby to cry. Now, it's only just now in the study of like neurological impacts of trauma that we're actually seeing that thing that parents were doing, that they were advised to do, where they thought they were doing the right thing, it actually creates both a neglect and an abandonment trauma. And the impact of how that then shapes our worldview is significant. So that happened to both little baby girls and little baby boys, right? But the way in which the traumas are manifested and expressed, and also the way in which they happen, are quite different for men and women. And I never used to think that. I used to get quite strong about, I don't believe in men and women and differences. We're all human and all this kind of, and I remember having a big argument with one of my really close friends about this. But the more that I've like really dug into this work, the more I realize actually the way in which the traumas occur, the way in which they're internalized are quite different between men and women. So in terms of the healing processes, and the returning back to wholeness, the process needs to be different for men and women. So that's why I've kind of split them apart in the
yeah.
programs.
Yeah, the point there, and for me personally, is how we recognize that we have these wounds that we need to heal, and
Mm-hmm.
everything starts by that. Because
Mm-hmm.
the problem now, what I have been seeing, is not just going just because we are women and need to go and ask for, I have a power, or let me show my powers. Is how, as you will explain, the masculine side and the feminine side is inside of you, and you have all the opportunities as well, because of
Yeah,
the society have been putting all those things in front of you that don't allowing you to really give that next steps, because this
mm-hmm.
probably is needs to be in charge, male needs to be in charge of that, it's not a woman. I have been a
No,
lot of women, especially recently, in all these things related with the community, and how we can empower ourselves as a human beings. It's not just about women, it's not just about man,
yeah,
is how we are going to have this and think that knowing ourselves and going inside and deeper in what is those wounds that we have and how to heal that will really start to make this change that have been not
absolutely.
given uh, for the moment something really radical, because we are just probably saying about many things that are happening but not doing. Look at all the
Mm-hmm.
things that you have been doing to arrive to this point. I'm really amazed
Absolutely.
with your experience and all these concepts that you have been actually created, because
Mm.
the problem is this, patriarchy is something that have been there always, and we have been just having a
Well, not
different
always. For
roles.
7,000 years.
Yeah, well,
There was a time before that
that's
where it
true.
didn't exist. But
Exactly,
like if
exactly.
I come from a long lineage of my ancestors, and recent ancestors, and still family that are alive today, that were, heavily addicted and abusive. Like, I'm a survivor of child abuse, and I've been very open about that through my career. The perpetrator in my family was my mother, and it was the long line of women that were abusers in the family. Now, there were definitely men that were also abusive in the family as well, in different ways, most largely emotionally abusive, and unavailable and disconnected. Um, but I've seen, those types of wounds that lead to that kind of like real physical violence and abuse. Some of them are deep masculine wounds that are living within a woman, you know. And in my time when I was working in filmmaking in Hollywood, I saw loads of women behaving really badly, like really badly. They didn't care that
Oh,
I was
wow.
like a woman trying to
Mm.
like forge a career for myself, and they didn't want to know anything about me, and they would do things to actively undercut me. I've seen women behave really badly. I've seen men behave really, really badly in all kinds of abuses, abusive, atrocious ways. And so even though there are very high statistics, which I'm not going to ignore. So it is a statistical fact that, 1 in 3 women experience domestic violence. It is a statistical fact that 1 in 4 murders of women are intimate acts of intimate partner violence. Those statistics are real, right?
Mm.
But there are also a lot of men who are experiencing abuse, and it's going unreported because, you know, it's not manly. You shouldn't have
Yeah.
to be, um, if your partner is abusing you, like, you should just be able to deal with it because you're a man. And so I think the abuse statistics of men being abused is underreported, but I'm not going to deny for 1 minute that the abuse statistics of women are exceedingly high, way too high. And this is like across all countries, because I've
Yeah.
worked on this topic across many, many countries. And so um, what is interesting to me, though, is there's this term in Tantra, it's called an inner marriage.
Hmm.
And
What is that?
it's where you're working with the wounded masculine or the distorted masculine within yourself, and the distorted feminine within yourself, healing those things together so that they come together as a complete whole in union. It's a
Wow, that
sense of
that is
wholeness
interesting.
in yourself, right? You're not searching for wholeness through another person, which is what we
But
often do in romantic relationships.
yeah, but how far we are to really get this into be aware about that concept, because that probably is the root of the problem, that we are just going and doing and just not taking in consideration that we have these two sides that we can really go and heal and do
Mm,
something to really address that problem. And this is how we can create this awareness
yeah.
together.
Yeah, well, I mean, this wisdom is not mine. This wisdom comes from thousands and thousands of years of ancient text and exploration of the soul, and how, humans work from a spiritual perspective. These are ancient teachings, but I think, interestingly, now that we're seeing a rise in psychedelic therapy or psychedelic-based therapy and healing.
Yeah.
For 2 years in a row now, there's been Psychedelics House at the World Economic Forum. I have, as I said, been working with 3 main types of medicines, had huge breakthroughs for myself, not just from that interpersonal experience, but I was actually sharing, yes, I had, from the age of about 10 or 11, a debilitating lung condition. I was a really elite sports person in my younger years. I was doing competitive athletics, competitive gymnastics. I was representing the state in some sports, and then at around 11 or 12, I stopped being able to breathe, and the doctors diagnosed me as having sports-induced asthma, which didn't really make any sense to me because I'd been doing sport my whole life. But it didn't matter what they diagnosed me with; I just couldn't breathe, and so I
Yeah.
pushed through and pushed through till I was about 14. And then I just could not do it anymore because I couldn't get air into my lungs. My lungs felt like they were crushing. I would taste blood in my throat. It was like very intensely painful experience. And I just stopped running. And now 35 years later,
Wow.
just 1 year of working on this program that I've designed, but with myself. Yesterday, I was able to hike 1.5 kilometers up a 40% incline with no pain.
Wow, that is amazing.
I
That is
could never have
amazing.
done that before. We got to almost
Yeah,
2,400 meters above sea level in the French Pyrenees, and I had
yeah.
zero pain. And it was only 1 year after doing this deep healing work and working with the plant medicines that I was able to conquer a 35-year debilitating problem with my lungs. So it's not
Wow.
that the impacts are really physical, visceral, but it has to be a deeply embodied experience, not just something that you learn off a set of PowerPoints. Here's some principles, here's some techniques and processes, now go do it. That's not regeneration. Regeneration is shifting your fundamental relationship to yourself as a complex living system, and then the rest of your relationship to the rest of the living systems around you.
Well, I wanted to ask you if you can share with us something um, as a kind of advice in order for all those people that are now listening to us and they are stuck in the situation whether they have been or abused in a way that they cannot express or have been living this world that is happen a lot here around from my environment in Luxembourg. I have been a male dominated industry that have been with high levels of stress and dealing with a lot of challenges. So, what will
Mm-hmm.
be this advice for them to really start to take the conscience about how to start making some changes because we cannot just leave it like that? So, what you will share with them?
Yeah, I had an amazing I was working at UN headquarters actually a few years ago on a program over, period of 3 days, and I met this amazing man who's still a friend, Mandahi, who's a Mexican elder, and he did a meditation on one of the days where he was giving thanks to the ancestors. I was thinking about my ancestors, and they were like drug addicts and alcoholics and abusers, and I felt myself getting really angry. I was like, I don't want to thank them. They're horrible people. Anyway, so I cornered Mindahi and I was like, Mindahi, what do I do if I don't want to give thanks to my ancestors if they were like this and that and they were horrible? And he thought for a minute. He says, you know what, Peter? He says, the perpetrators are just victims of victims. And that was my first insight into this like epigenetic concept of trauma,
Yeah,
of trauma passed through lineages. So only
yeah,
hurt people. And I think that that's really something to hold as an access to deep compassion, both for me, if I ever
mm,
have the urge to lash out and hurt someone, or if I'm experiencing someone hurting me. And then the other thing that I would say is
yeah,
everything is healable. And we need to find a way to just trust our own healing journey. And that the things
yeah,
that we need on our journey will come to us when we're ready.
yeah. I
I'm
agree with
building
you.
this program that I know works, right? I've done it for myself, so I know that it works. I'm offering it to men, and I don't know how many men are going to feel called to it. Some will,
Mm,
probably most won't, because they won't hear it for themselves yet. But what we need to have us supported on our journeys, on our life journey, will always show up at the time when we're ready.
yeah, yeah, that's true. And I see that if you have the tools available for you when that call arrives, it will be even better. I know that you already have been talking about the program, and I want you to give just some details about how all those men that wanted to feel or feel the call to do something for them to really change their situation and start healing their wounds will really be part of your program that I really found very interesting and making a really change in the world.
Yeah, well, people can visit me on www.petamilan.com and can see the programs that I'm offering. I'm going to run this program, this rewilding program for men. But I've also had people approach me to say, actually, this type of thing would be amazing for people in education, leaders in education, to look at how we do education differently. And I'm like, yeah, it would be amazing. And then, I know that working with leaders in policing and security, this would be amazing for them also. I've just seen so many amazing, brave first responders who are so deeply traumatized. I mean, if we look at what people had to go through on 9/11 and other types of horrific experiences that they've had to participate in, it's just trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, right? So there's so many great potential applications for this, as well as obviously working with women, because we have our own kind of inner marriage to work on and healing those wounds as well. But we're just like offering it out as gently as we can, seeing who feels called to it, and as more people feel called, we'll build and design those programs to meet those needs. But I am offering free webinars for people to come and learn some things. The webinars are only cognitive learning, of course, but it gives you a little bit of insight into regeneration and regenerative investing and what regenerative leadership looks like. So you can keep your eyes open for those webinars, because they are free. And then, as the programs emerge and arise beyond the rewilding the masculine, then there'll be more on offer for a broader range of people.
Yeah, well, not only that, and I want you to be part of the community, actually, to give all those tools that are part of how we can really heal these wounds that are very evident, that are there, and do something to really change that path and really make something that will generate this impact that we need. So I am really so happy having you, Peta, here, sharing all the things, a lot of wisdoms, a lot of things to learn from you, a lot of value to this community for all these people that are listening to the podcast. So more than happy to continue in contact with you with the purpose of giving value to others that haven't arrived yet to the level that you are right now, and we are doing. And I must prefer, and say always, I prefer to be part of the doers, that just the ones that are just speaking and really don't do it anything, and even having been affected by all the situation as well. So I just wanted to ask you if you want to add something else, if you want to say something else, just to wrap up.
Just that I'm available. If anybody wants to reach out, they can do that through you, Maria, or they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to, have a chat and, be supportive where I can.
Lovely. Thank you very much for being here, and looking forward to continue our building this nice connection. Thank you, Peta.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks for having me.
We hope you have been inspired by this content and join us for future episodes of the Brilliantly Branded podcast. We will continue exploring the power of branding and the stories behind successful brands. And remember, if you know a woman who has built a successful brand with a unique approach and a story to share, please refer them to our podcast. We would love to learn from their experiences and share their story with our listeners. Stay tuned for most episodes of Brilliantly Branded, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, on our YouTube channel for more branding insights and women empowerment. Until the next episode, ciao ciao.